Hello, everybody, and welcome to Women Are, which is an awesome panel show featuring creative professionals who talk in frank and funny ways about their journeys. This has been a really, really amazing series of panels to do. I've learned so much from our panelists, and especially if you love video games, and if you're on Twitch, I assume that, you are going to squee a lot with our panel today. The more that I research them, the more that I'm like, I admire these women all so much. They come from so many different backgrounds and they work at so many different kinds of studios and game development. So I think we're all going to learn a lot from all of them. Before we get into our guests, though, I want to reiterate that every week Women Are gives away $750 to charity. And this week is a charity that is very close to my heart. It's Black Girls Code. It's an amazing organization that helps do what exactly it says. And this is close to my heart because during a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests, the Guild came together during our streams to do a charity push. And I recently gave them a check for $6,000 based on the pins that we sold during that. And so this is definitely a charity that's always on my radar to support. And I'm so excited that we can help support them again today. If you choose to help them out also during this, please, I have some links in the chat or just search Black Girls Code online to be able to donate to their amazing cause. And I would love to introduce our panel. We have an amazing set of guests here, and I'm just going to turn it over to them because I usually mumble everybody else's bios. So I think they can introduce themselves the best, starting with Shella Ramanan. Shella, could you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I'm Shella Ramanan, and I'm a narrative designer at Ubisoft Massive in Malmö in Sweden. I'm also half of Threefold Games, which is a micro studio, and we released our first game called Before I Forget this summer, and that's a narrative exploration game about a woman with dementia. And I'm also the co-founder of POC in Play, which is an organization dedicated to increasing the visibility and representation of people of color in the games industry and in games.
Amazing. Thank you. I can't wait to learn more about all of that. Our next guest is Bonnie Ross. Bonnie, could you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience and tell them a little your history, which is an incredible history, I might add.
I'm Bonnie Ross, and I'm the head of 343 Industries, which is the Xbox gaming studio that manages all things Halo. I've been in the industry for about a long time, over 20 years, about 26 years, I think. And I just think it's a really exciting time for diversity in gaming and women in gaming and girls in gaming. And the platform that I really support and I'm passionate about is getting girls and kids of color into STEM. And I love being on this panel because it seems like we're with like-minded people.
Amazing. Amazing. Yes, absolutely. The whole point of this panel is to just make it a little bit more accessible for anybody who wants to enter the world of video game design today, or any of the panels that we have. And also, if you're a parent or a mentor to a young person, you can educate and open doors for them if you're watching. So thank you, guys. One of our next guests is Anna Anthopy. Anna, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Anna. I am a indie video game designer turned author turned educator turned tabletop role-playing game designer. So I've had a really kind of convoluted path. My most recent game is The Empress and Her Seer, which is about being a kind of Rasputin-esque figure, like kind of manipulating a court through the Empress's trust of you. And yeah, I teach game design in Chicago currently. So thanks for having me on your show.
Amazing. Yes, you are a woman of all trades, kind of like me. I have so many hybrids. When people introduce me on panels, it's a little bit embarrassing. Like, Felicia, focus. I'm like, I can't. But I think I do pretty much everything well. kind of well. And you do amazing work. I can't wait to explore a little bit of that in the panel.
Oh,
And
thank you.
our last amazing guest is Lizette Titre-Montgomery. Lizette, would you tell the audience a little bit about you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Lizette Titre-Montgomery. I've been making games for almost 20 years. I started as a character artist at a small studio called Page 44, and I've been making games ever since. I've worked at EA, Ubisoft, small studios like Backbone Entertainment, and now I'm at Double Fine, and I'm the art director on Psychonauts 2. So that's a really quick rundown. In addition to my career, I've been working in a diversity space for about 10 years, volunteering and doing public speaking. And I am also on the board of Gameheads, which is a school here in Oakland, where we help and develop students from the age of 14 to 24, so that they are essentially learning how to make their own games throughout the summer with the help of mentors from around the industry. It's an amazing program. Our students are now getting into the top game schools in the country, and they're now also starting to look for work. So we've been doing this long enough that we're actually feeding the pipeline, and it's just been, it's my pride and joy. I'm very, very, very happy with the results of that program.
That must be an amazing thing to see a kid just who didn't even know anything about it, and then literally you changed their life. That's incredible. So, just going off that, I'd love to hear about each of you, because we're talking about introducing this to new people, and a lot of our audience will be adults, but at the same time, they know children in their world, right? And so I guess I would love to hear what started you guys on your journey. What opened the door to video games to you, and what made you stick with them, even from a kid point of view, but also from a professional point of view. Shella, what was your first game that kind of entered you into the world of gaming?
Well, the first game I played was when I was young, and there was the kid next door who had everything for us. Got all the gear bought for him. So I probably played something like Pong or Frogger or something like that. But it didn't really engage me that much. It was just kind of like peripheral to my world, because it's not something we could afford as a family to, that sort of technology. So it wasn't until, there was one summer with my cousins from the States. We were visiting family in the Caribbean, and we were on a beautiful tropical island and spent the entire day inside playing Super Mario. Yes, and in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that was a waste of a day in beautiful Grenada, but it wasn't. And then it wasn't until I went to uni and I played Beneath the Steel Sky, and I think Tomb Raider as well was also a kind of pivotal game experiences for me.
Yeah, that was the old school Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting when we think about like the design of video game women, right? And there's a lot of controversy about them, but I think last week we had a comment from some of the comic book creators that we're just thirsty, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. When we're women, we're thirsty, and we just want any woman who can just kind of show us, oh, it's a cool woman protagonist. And back in the day, Lara Croft really was it, right? Like
right.
Now, yeah. Bonnie, what opened the door to you as a kid to get into all this video game stuff, and then what kind of got you onto a professional track?
Yeah, for me, I did grow up in the 80s, so it was definitely arcade games. And the first video game that I owned was a gift of that old Mattel basketball game, the handheld basketball game. I was huge into sports and playing sports, and that actually really opened the door for where I am now. I started in sports games, and basketball was my favorite sport. And there was a position that was opened at Microsoft when we decided to get into, and they didn't have anyone that had any gaming experience, which I didn't, except for playing my handheld basketball game, but needed sports experience. So sports kind of opened the door for me for both of them. I knew nothing of what I was doing except for how to play basketball, but it got me in. And then once I was in, I was hooked.
Amazing. That's really amazing. When people ask me, hey, how do you become an actor? I'm like, anything you do that besides acting will bring you farther in an acting career than anything. And it's so funny that same thing happens in video games, right? Anna, what hooked you in video games? What got you in?
Yeah, so the first game what kind of really brought me into game creation, game design, was this This 1991 shareware game called DZT. It was MS-DOS game made entirely up of letters and numbers. Created by the very first game by Tim Sweeney, who was the president and founder of Epic Games, like currently a billionaire with like some pretty busted opinions on games as a whole. But it came with a fully featured game editor with like scripting features and stuff. And so when I was like 9 or 10 years old, I was like dabbling with game creation, and that kind of really set me on a lifelong path into kind of where I am today. What really helped me when I really broke into doing game design commercially was actually the Flash games bubble. A lot of my first kind of commercial projects were games that I created for Newgrounds, newgrounds.com.
Played many games there, many games,
yeah,
many weird games, but I loved them.
I think probably I think maybe like the newest generation is probably not familiar with Newgrounds, but definitely for some of us, like those Flash games are really formative. And so I got paid to make some of those Flash games. And then the Flash bubble burst, and I needed to kind of figure out a different career after that. So
yeah, but that's cool that you have been the DIY queen almost. And that's why I love just learning more and more about what you do, because you just do it. You create, you have this creative expression in yourself, and you just let it out. And that's so funny that, kind of modding and making your own game out of somebody else's thing kind of started you on this path. Lizette, what got you in? Because I know that you come from more the art background. Did you make the background behind you, by the way?
No, that's Elvid Earl. I would never take credit for his work.
It's beautiful.
Let's see. So my career was definitely a little bit more circular. I was always interested in the arts, and I thought I was going to be like a fashion designer in like middle school. And I always like kind of pursued my interest in that sort of creative way. And it really wasn't until I graduated from college that I thought about video games as a career. I always played them as a young girl and was very attracted to them. I remember seeing, Miss Pac-Man and that lipstick and that bow, and just being attracted to just that, that was my arcade at the shop. So I remember always loving them. And it wasn't until I got my training in film that I actually started thinking about my career in games. So after graduating from college, I moved here, and my first job was at a game studio, and I've been doing it for 20 years ever since. I just kind of fell in love with it. I fell in love with the passive versus, interactive elements. Passive elements of film were never as interesting to me as the interactive elements of games, and I just have been doing it since.
And did you have someone in your house that kind of helped you pick up that controller? Because I guess, maybe nowadays just every phone has games on it, but, if you're our age or, there were a little bit more of a barrier to entry. What was that person who opened that door to you?
I think, outside of going to the malls and seeing the arcades, I had a friend in the neighborhood who had a Nintendo, and I really wanted to play that damn Nintendo. So I made friends with him to play his Nintendo. And I think my dad was like, my daughter's going over to this boy's house. I'm gonna go buy a Nintendo.
Oh,
so
amazing.
I got a Nintendo after that.
Amazing. So the wonderful way, as you can hear from the introductions to our guests, they come into this world from a lot of different ways. And I'd love to talk about that, because I think when we think video game designer, we're thinking one kind of person who might go to a huge corporation and program there. But really, Bonnie, when I emailed you about this, you corrected me. You said, I'm not really a designer per se. I kind of oversee designers. And I was like, that's fascinating too, because I'd love to know what your job is. Like, what are the nitty gritties of what you do, and what participation do you have in the design of a video game, and how many different aspects are those? Can we talk about here that you are involved in?
Yeah, I know I was so excited when you emailed me and asked me to be on a panel, because I love you. And
thank you.
Then I saw it was for a game designer panel, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll just like fake it. But I had to come clean. And then I told her, I'm like, not really a game designer, but I would, I play one sometimes at work. My team would say probably like 4 or 5 times a week, I do play game designer, much to their irritation. But I say my job at this point in my career is just overseeing the franchise. So it's a combination of creative, production, and business.
Mhm.
But it really is being able to sort of steward the Halo franchise and think about the games we're doing. And I do have creative direction, but I have experts that are really doing the design, so TV show, toys, esports, all those things. So it's an amazing job and I love it, but I'm probably not as talented as many of the other women that are here on this panel.
I do the same thing. I always downplay my abilities, and I feel like as women we're kind of taught to do that because of just being bold about being awesome. And that's why I tell my baby whenever she says I'm not good at throwing, and I'm like, okay, what are you great at? And I always have her do something great. So I know that you're great, Bonnie. But you're that I think having run a company of myself, a very small company comparative, I cannot even tell you the value of the skills that you have to combine. I mean, really, you are a jack of all, you have to, the business acumen, the artistic vision of overseeing a franchise, that is a lot. And you mentioned that you're involved in the TV show and all the merchandising. Are you sort of the yes, no person or consult on all creative aspects of that creative process?
Yeah, I feel really lucky that I have an amazing leadership team. And so I do have leads over each of the businesses, but I do get to, for example, this morning we did a table read for 2 upcoming episodes for the Halo TV series.
Mm-hmm.
And it's huge. I mean, it's wonderful and creative, but I get to be part of it. And I do give high level direction on games and what we do, but I do have experts that, day to day, in this case, Kiki Wolfkill is working on the Showtime TV series, or Frank O'Connor. I just have some really great leads, but they give me time to put some creative input in, which I appreciate that.
Yeah, I've watched a interview with you that was really amazing. I think it was from when you were getting you were being admitted to the Video Game Hall of Fame, I think, and you were talking about how over the years you kind of wanted to be more into the creative world, but you were kind of pushed into the more technical, the more managerial. Do you think that? What do you think contributed to that? Was it just your skill set? Was it something to do with your gender? Because I do notice a lot of the times women get pushed into areas where they have to oversee more of the creative visions for guys. I don't know if that doesn't have anything to do with it. Totally fine. I'm just curious about that.
No, I think a lot for me, it was, I was a college hire for Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came in on the technical side. But one of the things and one of the reasons why I think it's really important that we inform young girls that it isn't just all about technology, although technology, I think, empowers the art. I came in and I wanted to, focus on technology, but I don't think I would have stayed unless I found that creative outlet. So for me, I did kind of stumble upon games.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of wanted to break from what I was doing, but it really nurtured and brought together. I think like gaming is this amazing merging of art and technology empowering art and storytelling and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And once I brought the two together, I think it basically, sort of satisfied both parts for me. But I think a lot of how we teach engineering or computer science is very focused on the technical versus the creative, when really it's just a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Power creativity. So for me, it was about connecting the dots, and I am so grateful for finding gaming.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think, and I've given quite a lot of speeches, and actually, I was the valedictorian of my college class. I got a math degree.
Woo-hoo!
I know. Hello. But I gave a speech on finding the creativity in your art, and I feel like even if you look at the programming or the required elements for engineering and computer science and things like that, there's no cultivating of skill sets using creativity in your technical skills. And you're right, it's literally the technology is just the tools you have to put together with your creativity, right? There are algorithms and there are ways you have to do things, certainly, but at the end of the day, it's when you break those rules is where you really revolutionize and create things that last. So I really always try to emphasize that, and I love that you echo that that's really important. Lizette, you come from the artistic side, so I'd love to hear about your journey. Like, where did you find opportunities to, you mentioned that you wanted to be a fashion designer and you had all these other artistic outlets. What really sparked you as far as like, this is an outlet where I can be creative. I I can really dig in and show my artistic side through all this technicality. And was that intimidating at first when you started getting into it?
I think I didn't slow down enough to be intimidated. Once I was extremely interested in the combination of art and technology, I just kind of kept chasing my passion. Like you said, when I was younger, I thought I was going to be a fashion designer because that's what I had around me to see. And really, I didn't really start thinking about creativity and technology together until I was in high school. And, Pixar's first Toy Story had just come out. That's how old I am. And it was like my senior year in high school. And then like one of the first computer gaming schools had opened. And I remember being in school and thinking, I don't know what that is, but I want to do it. I want to do that. I don't know what it's going to take, but I want to do that. And so, after high school, I had my daughter, and then I went back to school for computer animation, and then I just sort of took it from there. And the thing that has always been interesting to me about it is this fusion of creativity and technology. It's like that constant, it's this weird synergy of it fights itself and then it also pushes itself. And you're just constantly training and pushing and trying to go for a very like unique visual style and fighting the technology along the way. And it's that journey that I think is what I'm still very much attracted to, is pushing the boundaries and figuring out how we can use art in very unique ways and not the most common ways we're using them now.
Yeah, it's almost like I try to think of the times in my life where really technology has pushed forward artistry, and it every time like the iPhone is introduced and a new way of interacting comes into the forefront, right? And we have a new kind of graphic, like look at graphics 20 years ago on computer games. When we get a new engine that can provide that sort of artistic outlet, then we get a surge of creativity and new art from our technology. And so really the platforms enable us to be creative. And that's kind of what always pushes us forward. Like, within our lifetimes and our careers, we're going to go through many different technologies, and that keeps it fresh versus being a traditional artist where you're always working with clay, right?
Yeah, it is very much about continuing to push things forward.
Yeah. And you work at a sort of a mid-level, middle-sized studio, I just assume. It kind of has this Double Fine always seems to me like it has this indie spirit to it, but it still is now part of Microsoft. Can you talk about the culture creation in a place like that is a little bit more loose than at a bigger place? How do you feel like you approach that sort of creative process within that kind of studio?
Yeah, I think Double Fine is definitely its own magical beast when it comes to the creative process. I've worked at small studios and large studios, and EA and Ubisoft certainly have a different approach to game design and team structures, and Double Fine certainly does. So for us, and particularly a game like Psychonauts, our decisions are not necessarily so much driven by the technology as it is driven by Tim's vision and what we want to make as a team. So for us, Tim will have an idea of like, I really want to work on a level that's around, I don't know, macaroni. And we're like, how are we going to make a whole level about mac and cheese? But, that's kind of like the kind of challenges we would have. I mean, that's a literal example of the conversation I've had.
Where can we find this macaroni level?
It's a bit on the cutting room floor. But I mean, Tim will come to an idea. It's like, I want to make a game about, or make a level around a brain in the jar that you find, and it has to figure out how to use its senses. Now go figure that out.
Amazing.
So that's sort of like what Double Fine is we're very heavily driven by the creative ideas and the pursuit of executing on those ideas, rather than how can we use this engine to do this kind of game because it's making a lot of money.
Yeah, got you. I have a story about Tim Schafer. I was in Barcelona on my birthday about 5 years ago, and I went to this place called Bodega 1900 or something like that. It's my favorite restaurant in the world because they have the best vermouth, and I'm not a drinker, but like for some reason this vermouth is like woo woo. And I was sitting there, and suddenly this little table, and I could hear them speaking English, and I was like, oh, there's some Americans up there. But then they left, and then a bottle got sent over to my table of vermouth, and it was Tim Schafer and the guy who founded Rock Band. They were like, hey, just wanted to send you a birthday gift. And I was like, why did you leave and not say anything? So I don't know if I've actually met Tim in person, but he did get me very drunk on my birthday 5 years ago.
That sounds like Tim.
It sounds like Tim. I know. Really awesome dude. Okay. Shella, I'd love to talk about your journey because we're talking about Lizette, who came from art, and Bonnie, who came from sports and technical and all sorts of things. You came as a writer. And so it's interesting. You're almost not, it's not a fan kind of perspective, but it is a journalist perspective of games. And how did that transition work for you? When did you decide, hey, I want to make games versus just write about them?
Well, I wrote about games for a really long time, and I was always writing fiction on the side. I was always trying to finish a novel. I ran a writing group, and I was very serious about one day being published as a fiction writer, not just as a journalist. And for some reason, I didn't connect the dots together that I could write. I don't know what happened. I had my brain had a disconnect for a really long time. And then I saw a course. There's a foundation called the Arbonne Foundation, which is a literary foundation that runs writing retreats that are sort of tutor-led, and they're all in houses that have been donated by literary figures. So I was in the Ted Hughes house and I was doing a writing for games course. And,
amazing.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, so I just saw it advertised and I was like, oh, that would be good, because then I could write fiction, but they're in game. It was just like, it was like a light bulb.
Yeah.
So I did that. It was a week up in Yorkshire. John Ingold from Ingold Games was one of the tutors. Rhianna Pratchett was a guest tutor. She was there for an evening, and David Varela was the other tutor, and that kind of set me on the path. I think I didn't realize how ready I was to leave games journalism. But yeah, when this generation of consoles was announced, I was like, oh my God, I don't have to write about another console. Because it's so cyclical, and you do the piece about all the numbers and what's inside,
frame rates,
yeah,
people complaining, the comment section, terrible.
Yeah. Stop. Yeah. And so so that course set me on a new path, and after that I went on a writing for radio drama course. I did a day workshop. And then I wrote a radio play because I thought, I'm just going to expand my sort of my range as a writer. And then I went to a game jam, and and then I made Before I Forget.
I mean, I wanted to talk to you about game jams because I feel like those are a good entry point into some people who are kind of going a non-traditional path into getting into, because it's kind of a creative mishmash of people who just, and I think when we're in a vacuum, I was a violinist, and all I did when I was a kid was listen to Itzhak Perlman, and I was like, well, I'm never going to make a game. I mean, I'm never going to play like that, right? Because he's so good. But then you don't really get an exposure to people who are either your contemporaries, at your level, below your level, a little bit above your level, so that you realize, oh, this is a ladder of ability I can climb because I see it's possible. So how did game jams play into your journey like that?
Yeah, so the game jam was actually hosted so the retreat that I went on was up in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England, and I was in the southwest. So it was like, I mean, for an American, it's like, I don't know, the end of the garden path, but like in the UK, it's really far, okay? Yeah. And I met a woman there. The only other woman there actually lived in Bristol, which was a neighbouring city, like really close to me. And she hosted the game jam. So, and it was an XX plus game jam. So it was for women and non-binary people. And that's part of the reason that I went, because it was less intimidating. And it changed my life, basically.
Amazing.
So, yeah. I was absolutely sort of petrified because I was like, well, I'm only a writer, I'm not technical. And I actually emailed Constance, and I was like, Constance, I don't think I should go because this is kind of ridiculous. And she's like, don't be so bloody stupid. I'm just like,
that's so British.
She's just like, don't be ridiculous, just come. And so I did. And then I met Claire, and we won the Audience Choice Award. So it was the game people most wanted to see finished. And if that hadn't happened, we'd probably have gone, oh, it was really nice meeting you, it was fun, and just walked away. But but yeah, it really changed my life, and you meet all sorts of people there. And yeah, I think, even if you don't spend the next 4 years making a game and like publish something on Steam, I think a game jam is a really great way to meet other people who are interested in making games. And a game jam forces you to make something. So it proves to you that you can actually do a thing. And yeah, you just don't know who you're going to meet there, who you're going to be thrown together with. And there's real buzz and energy. And yeah, I mean, I'm completely biased, obviously, because yeah, it changed my
No, I
life.
think it's amazing. It's like 24-hour film festivals. It's like, sometimes you really just have to go out on a limb and do something super scary that you're going to fail at, maybe. And that's
Yeah.
okay, because the society around that event might boost you up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Anna, I'm going to throw a couple questions to the whole panel, but I really do want to talk to you about some of the things you do, because I'm so fascinated with the breadth of creativity and the way that you treat. It's almost like you really do treat games as an artistic out. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you're on a tour, and I'd love to hear about that journey, and what inspires you to make a game, and how do you figure out the format? And you seem to be a one-woman show in a lot of ways. And is that by choice? Do you ever want to work in a bigger kind of organization, or do you really just like doing your own vision? Because I deal with that a lot myself. And I just love to hear how you operate and what inspires you.
Yeah, I'm really I'm pretty self-taught at everything I do in games. I really I really value kind of the DIY ethic in games. My first book was about like comparing games to zines. I think that if we look historically at who, where the kind of first digital games came from, they were pretty much exclusively made by people who were like students in engineering schools, the only places that had computers. And historically, engineering schools and engineering programs are things that are like pretty exclusionary of gender minorities, that tend to filter those people out. Also like Black and POC, also trans and queer people. And so the games industry and the technology industry of this day still continues to be that in a lot of ways. Still continues to struggle with those problems, often in ways that are invisible. So for example, and this is like one reason that I don't think I could work in a large team. The games industry has like a really bad problem with crunch, with like hours and hours of unpaid overtime. And, one of the kind of the ideas that, one of the big ideas that second wave feminism gave us is the idea that women and femmes often end up doing this, what was called the second shift. They end up doing this additional amount of unpaid domestic and emotional labor, in addition to, their whatever actual day job they may end up with. And so if you are, pulling 10 plus hour shifts, at your workplace, and then you're expected to then come home and like do a more substantially large share of like taking care of the kids, it becomes very difficult to exist within the games industry in that kind of way. I don't have kids, but I'm a disabled person. And so I couldn't exist in a workplace where crunch exists. And so for that reason, I think I'm like kind of trying to answer both questions. This is why I think it's so important that there be paths into game design that do not go through the traditional kind of professional path that's very based in engineering and based in the industry model. And also why I don't think I would be a good fit, regardless of whether I wanted to or not. Why I don't think I would be able to survive in that kind of setting.
Yeah. No, I totally hear you. And that is not just, I think, a video game issue. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm on video, if I'm on a TV set, and I'm an actor, I'll be working until 3 a.m. on Fridays. I won't put my baby to bed probably during the week, right? Unless she comes to my trailer. And if you are a writer, there is a huge bias against people with children. They are like literally weeded out in the interview process because people look at parents as people who can't drop everything and live at the writing room. And they're,
Yeah.
you know, and so this
That's-
is a tax on women that really, especially with quarantine, is a real problem because every survey says that in science, women drop out when they have their children and it's hard to get back in at the same level, you know, because if you take time off, people don't look at you like you've fallen behind. So there's so many factors that really
that
outweigh that.
absolutely is true of like a lot of different fields, but I
Mhm.
do want to add that it is like especially true of the games industry, which is not unionized at all.
100%. Yeah, the union really is the fail-safe for creative people, and I'm hoping, you know, and we within our lifetime maybe there will be a union. Who knows?
Absolutely.
I thank my union every day for my health insurance, at least. I just want to touch a little bit before we go to the panel on a couple questions. I love some of the stuff on your website, and it's so fascinating. I downloaded Princess with a Cursed Sword, and it's like a single role-playing game where you just use tarot cards to tell a story. I just love it's almost as if you have so much creativity. You're like, let me hand you the keys to just create today. And I love that. Can you talk about sort of some of the things that you are working on now and you're most passionate about and how people can experience that? Because I just love, I want to stream one of these things you've done because I just think
Oh,
it's so-
fantastic! A chance to plug my work. So I have a couple cool things in the works that I'm really excited about. The Kickstarter for a new project called Strange Loves, Strange Lusts is coming up at the end of the month. This is a compilation of I think at least 7 pieces of erotic interactive fiction by a variety of different authors. Which I have my editors are Shireen Biswas and Cleo Yunsu Davis, and they're amazing. And you can sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live. That's going to be really cool, and I'm really excited about that. Also, I have a new kind of 2-player role-playing game that's like it's about kind of flirting with someone and then fighting them. So it's like very She-Ra inspired, which is
Yes.
coming out next month in a book called The Ultimate Micro RPG Book from Simon & Schuster. So you can also pre-order that book right now,
Yay!
along with 39 other games in that book. So if you're looking for a place to get into doing kind of, doing role playing that, kinds of games you haven't played before, that's a great jumping on point.
And has that been something you're going toward more of a fiction sort of format because you did some really cool little video games. Is something like Twine that you've created in Twine, like where would you suggest a DIY person start with just storytelling video games? What platform, what venue?
Narrative games, I think Twine is a fantastic place to start. I actually I recently wrote a series of kids books about how to get started making games using free tools. And the first book in that series, and I think kind of one of the best ones, is Make Your Own Video Games with Twine from No Starts Press. That I think is a great place to start if you have no experience with programming or making games and just want to start telling some interactive stories. I think that's a great thing. That's a great place to.
No, that's specifically why I found you, because I was looking for people who created on Twine, because I've always had like, oh, if you just had a summer off, you could do a Twine game because there is no barrier to entry. And I think that goes back to all the panel talking about creativity in games. Really, the barrier to entry is some of those more technical things. And if you could take that out of it, you can really get to the pure storytelling of it if you're interested in that versus the mechanics. Okay, I'm talking to all of you too long because you're all just fascinating. I'd love to hear from you guys. I've been in the games industry as sort of a fan and sort of this weird tangential figure for like 13, 14 years now, which is crazy. And I would love to hear from you guys, and Bonnie, I'd love to hear from you because you are such an advocate for women in games. It's particularly, I mean, all of you are, but I've seen so many speeches of yours. But have you noticed like trends within the industry? And this is to the panel in general. In the last 10 years, have you seen a lot of shifts in the way that people are making efforts and just the culture is moving behind the scenes for women?
Yeah, I think in the last 10 years, we're seeing a lot more female characters in games and, protagonists or characters that are strong characters. I think more diverse stories. I think more characters of color. And then I think being able to, when you can create your own character, I think there's a lot more options. And I think we're also seeing a lot more women and people of color on stages when we're having presenting in the gaming industry. So I do think that we've made a lot of progress here. I think we have a ton still to go. I think, and I don't know if it's controversial or not, but I think that I don't think we had the best response, but I do feel like Gamergate, Me Too sort of brought to the front the conversation and maybe awareness. And so I think you have a lot of companies that are more aware, a lot of designers that are more aware in creating things that are more, I think entertainment's for everyone. And so basically, I think you have more people thinking about who's creating those games and how are they representing. So I think we have made progress. I think we have a ton more to go, but I think a lot has changed in the last 10 years.
Do you see on the
I
top
think
level? Oh, sorry. Yeah. So
I was just gonna add, I think a lot of companies completely dropped the ball on Gamergate, actually.
Yes.
And refused to change in ways that maybe were necessary to stop something like that from happening again. But
I mean, believe me, I used to be a spokesperson for many video games. I used to do presentations for a lot of companies. I got dragged into that, and I was not hired for
same.
years. I was not hired for years. I mean, just now people are opening the door a little bit, just because I was so traumatized. I went away because I felt rejected, because I became controversial, because 1,000 people would show up wherever I went and just blast me. And I think time has taken that down, but it doesn't. I feel like now Me Too has made a more of a change in that. And I don't mean to insert myself into everything, but yes, I totally agree with you.
No, I would say that how we handled it, I think that we did not handle Gamergate very well. I think when Me Too came along with it, I think it brought that back as a conversation piece in the front. But I do think how we handled it was not good. But I think when you look at what's happened afterwards and character representation, stories in games, I do believe that that top of mind helped create some of that change. And I could be wrong there, but I think that a lot of change and awareness happened post that. But I also agree, it was not a pretty time.
Yeah, agree. No, I agree. I mean, just think about, I talk about the thirst trap because I stole that from one of my pizza. But like when you mentioned Pac-Man, Lizette, and we mentioned Laura Croft, like those are maybe not like things we're like, oh, but believe me, we will gravitate toward anything. And I see my little girl and she gravitates toward female characters. And the more we can provide, and I see so much out there now that she can draw upon to be inspired versus like when I was a kid, right?
Yeah, I would say, I've seen a lot of change happen. I'm seeing more women. I remember when I was first working at EA, I almost had my own bathroom stall because there wasn't enough women to kind of use all the stalls. And now, there's a lot more men and women in the studio. And I think what we have to acknowledge is that we are hiring a lot of these women at an entry level. And the women who are here are finally moving their way up to senior. And, positions like, Bonnie's and myself, and you're getting into director positions, but there are not enough of us. And so a lot of women who are coming into the industry are brushing up against people who are still not willing to kind of evolve and change. And I think what we've seen this last year with a lot of the controversy is because of that.
Yeah.
But at the other end, I see a very, very bright future for women. I see what I really would love to see is more funding of women in games and projects and studios, because we're really only kind of putting on women and diversity icing if it's still mostly men making the creative calls.
100%.
And until we actually have women creators as part of the process from day one, we're not really making content for our audience.
Yeah, that's 100%. I put it perfectly. And it's also a question of, as you say, that women working their way up to the ranks, women need to be in charge. Bonnie is in charge, and you are in charge. And the more women are in charge, then that's real change can happen. But the same thing with Hollywood, if the execs are all white men and the top of the studios are all white men, then if essentially their filter is filtering things. And when they do something, it's not organic, it's dressing or whatever. And so the more we can retain women. Yeah.
Yeah, or they're picking projects that appeal to them based on their sensibilities, but they're not necessarily putting it through the lens of what women want, because why would they know that?
Yeah, 100%. And the fact that women, when they choose to have a child, that's going to upend anybody's life. And like Anna said, that the video game world is maybe not as, it's just not sustainable to have a kid and have those hours. And then you kind of fall behind in a sense. And, providing childcare, all these things would really enable that to happen. But we're not going to change the world here, but we could talk about it. um, Anna, I want to talk a little bit about the backlash that you've had. Some of your stories have had some backlash. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with it? I don't think you're the kind of person who would self-censor because of it, but how do you deal with that? And how do any of you recommend people deal with the kind of backlash that they may get because they are a woman or a person of color in games?
I guess I want to start just to add a little bit onto the previous conversation. That I think that diversity and diversity and representation is great, and we're certainly seeing a lot more of it than we have. I just finished Ekenfell, which is a game that features a mostly queer cast, multiple different non-binary characters, but diversity of representation is not the same as like inclusion of diverse creators, and so I think in that area in particular, we need to not mistake one of those kinds of progress for the other. And in one of those, we certainly are further along than in the other.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of backlash, it fucking sucks. Can I say that on your show?
Yeah, whatever. It's fine. It's women
okay.
R. It's not women PG.
As kind of already mentioned, like I've been doxxed. I've had partners doxxed. I've had family members doxxed. It's not good. I usually when I get, this is a great question, because I think my strategy in a lot of ways was a lot like yours, Felicia, which was that I kind of dropped out of creating for a while, and dropped out of interacting with social media for a while, which I think is fine and healthy. I think there is a desire to set up women who are victimized as like, there's a desire to try to push us into like this hero narrative where we have to basically self-martyr, where we have to be willing to keep fighting at all costs, and like suffer all the slings and arrows that are like that are sent our way. But I think that's not very caring of victims, and that leads to people burning out and leaving the industry and getting real harm. And so I think often one of the strongest things you can do is like step away from a while and like say like, I don't need to be the person who's like on Twitter defending myself from like the Reddit squad today,
Yeah, no, I think we all have that sort of like, we can't be people, we become our representative of, that's a woman in gaming, or that's a person of color. Like you have the label and you're like, I have to live for this label and represent, and it's so heavy sometimes, right? Whereas
because
you're
there
not
are so
taking
few
care of
of
yourself.
us. Yeah, that we become spokespeople for the marginalized groups that we are members
what are you
of.
representing? You can't disappear and take care of yourself. And actually, Shella, I'd love to talk to you about your advocacy group, People of Color in Play, because that is that dovetails right into what we're talking about. How does that organization work, and how do you foment change with that organization?
So we were formed in 2018. So we haven't been going that long. And yeah, everything's changed this year, obviously.
Yeah.
Because we used to have monthly sort of social networking gatherings in London. And one of the things that we were clear about was that we wanted to be inclusive to people who were interested in games, because a lot of diversity groups are for people who are already in games or studying games or something. And we wanted to make sure that we were including people who were just interested, and that includes educators and sort of people who work for the council, and just students and people who are currently accountants but didn't even know how to get into games. And so that was so it was a very open door kind of policy on our social gatherings, and we had speakers and sometimes sort of showcased games by people of color. And we're a space, we're an organization for the industry to turn to, and to support the industry in getting better. And then the other thing that we were very conscious of was not being London centric, which the UK games industry really is. Once you step outside the M25, it's like you don't exist, really.
Yeah.
And which London is London centric, never mind the games industry. So this year we had our first Puck in Play in the north, so it's in the north of England. When we first set up, Us Two Games was our home, the home of our gatherings, and gave us a bursary every month so we could pay the travel costs for someone outside of London. So we had someone from Berlin, and we had people from Scotland, and that was really great, because that's another barrier to entry, is like if you can't get to London, then you're sort of excluded from the games industry in that way. And then this year we actually had our first one in the north of England. But beyond the events, we have an initiative that we were going to do this like around now, actually, and we had all the things in place. But we can't because of the pandemic. And we had an initiative to do stock photography with people of color in sort of games, professional sort of settings, and as gamers, so marketers and journalists had photography that they could use that included people other than white blokes, basically. So yeah, sort of initiatives like that. We have lots of ideas, and the one good thing that the pandemic has given us is like the sort of space and time to set up the infrastructure of the organization. So like open our bank account, and we now have a sponsors page, and we have sponsorship coming in from people, and so it's given us that space. But obviously it's been a really exhausting year for particularly the Black members of the team. So yeah, it's finding that energy at the moment is kind of tough, but the team is amazing.
Well, yeah, and if anybody want to check out her website, it's pocplay.org. And it sounds like an amazing thing that should be international. If you can keep going. I know quarantine definitely pushes it back. Okay, I'm going to get to some questions, you guys. Please post the questions in the chat. We are going to stop at 3:15, so I'm sorry I always go over, but these are two interesting people. They're four interesting people who are too interesting for me. I have a question for Bonnie and Lizette, and it's a little bit self-centered about parenting and being a mom. I would love to hear from you guys. How did you introduce games to your kids? Do you have girls? How did you interest them in games? Did they push back against you? And most importantly, I've been teaching, I want my kid to be a gamer. I don't want her to be playing games all the time because that's not great for her brain. But we play Mario, and we played a lot of Nintendo games. And over again, I have to sort of self-correct Peach, or other female characters, because it seems like the narrative is always that we are going out to save a woman who can't get out of a man's hand or Bowser's hand or whatever. It's very challenging. So A, how did you deal with your own children around this issue? And B, how do we deal? We could talk about the whole panel. How do we deal with this as a whole?
Well, I've definitely been through the full cycle of parenting. My daughter is 24, and now I have a grandson.
Okay, you are so young looking. Stop.
So it's sort of been a very interesting journey, I think. When it comes to my daughter was a teenager, I was fortunate that she had The Sims around, and she immediately kind of gravitated toward that. And because I worked at EA at the time through most of her developmental years, I would kind of find things and bring them home to her, so we would have things to talk about. So she understood that, like, this is what mommy does, and I would explain how the games work, and we would play the games together. And it was a way for us to have a game life together, because the game, my career took so much of my time from her. So I wanted her to have her own relationship with me in games. So for me, it was a lot about trying to use them as a way to bond with me and others rather than like self-isolating and kind of staying to yourself. But you know, needless to say, it's just kind of hard with teenagers. I self-isolate on purpose.
They want to get out.
Development. But it was always important for me that she had something fun and positive to play. I wasn't like shooters are fine. It's just not something I would have brought home for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Bonnie, how do you have 2 kids you mentioned. I don't know if they're girls or boys, but how do you deal with that? And how do you, as a franchise, Halo is so iconic. It's so popular. How do you, is that something that you have in mind when you're looking at it to make sure there is like female representation? Or, I mean, is that a factor when you think about the brand as a whole? And also your children, because I'm curious about both. Those are not even related. I'm so sorry.
I have a boy, I have a son and a daughter. So, and it's been great to have perspective. And I was definitely pretty hardcore on what they could and couldn't play, growing up. And I would say for Halo, your Halo question in particular, yes, and if you look at, there's been a lot of work, and I think just by having diversity in leadership, I'm not just awareness, I think the team thinks differently. So many of the characters in Halo 4, genders were switched after we did the initial script, because the team itself was realizing that there were a lot of stereotypical roles. For example, Spartan Sarah Palmer used to be a male in the original script, and during the script read, he was changed to a she, and then she also was the head of one of our mobile games. And so that, I think, is really important. I think it was important for the whole team to have a diverse cast. We were really like when we think about Spartan Locke, who is a Black protagonist, and then you look at this time we've got a Latino. We're very, very deliberate in trying to make sure that you can see yourself in a universe, because we are all in this universe. As far as kids, it's interesting. My kids are definitely more mobile focused than console focused. And I would say that my daughter from a young age was very aware of sort of stereotypes out. One of the funny things, just a quick story, when we were at the Video Game Awards, I brought my kids, and Florence, that's one of my daughter's favorite games.
Amazing.
Won awards, and she said, "I thought this was a video game award show." And I'm like, "It is."
Wow.
And she goes, "Well, but no, Florence just won an award." And I think in her mind, phone games, and even like just what it was, she wasn't even thinking of it as a game, but what she gravitates to are more of those storytelling games. So I would just say you definitely should, but my daughter called it out early on, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's because you reinforced it from a young age, probably, because when you just present something like Snow White goes to, she takes the apple, and then a guy wakes her up and she goes off with him. And I'm always like, what can I do to sort of subvert this? Because I don't want to like have her be that kid who never was exposed to Snow White. I'm like, Snow White really made some bad choices, right? Like, you don't just go off with a man who kisses you. Like, you just don't do that, right? And so, so I guess we just have to deal with the world. That we can live in an ideal world and create a bubble, or we can deal with the world, but in a way where we give them the tools to self-criticize. And I'm sorry, when I see Peach in a very loose hand of Bowser, like, hey, Mario, I want to slap her across the face, but that's okay. It's not her fault. She was made to do that. I wouldn't want to slap her, but I would be. I get a little frustrated with Peach. I'm like, just get out of Bowser's hand, please. Anyway, but when I tell her, just for the record, I'm like, Peach is a scientist. She's not strong enough to get out of his hand, but she does science. And so that's what my baby now says. She says, Peach is a really good scientist. So anyway, this is a tangent that I didn't need to go on. Okay, I'm going to do a couple questions. Let's see. Art is so Dimaji Buffont photo says, art is so representative of culture that surrounds it, but with the long development times of video games, how do you all design around or incorporate current cultural conversations without them becoming outdated? That's an interesting comment. How do you guys deal with that in your work?
Oh, I just make games really quickly. Because I make really small games. Think that I think that in this regard, especially, polish is often the enemy of creativity in a creative process. Exactly as the question asker said, a long process of endlessly kind of polishing and smoothing can make something feel really dated. If you are kind of responding to something in the moment, like you kind of need to strike while the iron's hot. And so I think that for me at least, and this was also partly a consequence of like economic factors, but it's been more valuable for me to spend, spend 6 months making like 100 tiny games than in making one like extremely well polished game. Has led to more interesting and exploratory work.
Yeah, I wish I had that option, but I've been working mostly in console. And some games are in cycle for 3 to 5 years. So in those situations, what you hope that you and your writer team are doing are making meaningful and relevant creative decisions so that they stand up over time. Like if you're trying to take, hot takes on the current state of commentary in 2020, may or may not land in 2022. And you kind of always have to kind of think about that. I could say that I've definitely been on projects where they've written jokes and they don't stand the test of time, and then you're scrambling to do rewrites and reshoot cut scenes or cut levels because those jokes no longer make sense. So for me, my tactic is always to try to work on meaningful content because that's what's going to stick.
To be fair, 2022 will be a completely different reality than the one we live in right now.
I think next month, the month after that, at this point with 2020.
I know, you're right. It's really, really hard. Or we'll just never escape 2020.
God, don't say that.
I'm sorry. Gears of Madness asked an interesting question, and we're going to wrap up. I'm going to ask one question after this because I really want to talk about it. How can we help? And this, I'm going to broaden this question a little bit. The question is how to help women feel welcome in and around the tech industry while in university, giving the male-female ratio. Let me broaden that question because a lot of you guys do mentorship and work with children or young adults or college people. What are the most what are the things that you feel have helped most in your interaction with young people to encourage them along the path of pursuing video games? What is some advice or actions that you've done that have helped the most?
I guess I can take this. So I teach college students who are going into an industry of which they are terrified. So I spend a lot of time, I do a couple of things. I try and be really conscious about pushing back on a culture that even within our program, which has like a pretty diverse set of teachers, still manages to pick up a lot of the toxic values of the games culture. So I try and push back on that a lot by offering alternatives. I've done board game tea parties and stuff like that as a way to like kind of create a culture outside of that. But the other thing I do is I spend a lot of time talking about labor, and I've invited a lot of folks from like the local chapter of Game Workers Unite in to speak to my students, stuff like that, because I really think that for a lot of reasons that I talked about earlier, I think the thing that would most protect marginalized people, including women, including marginalized genders within the games industry, is to unionize and be able to advocate for better labor rights.
Bonnie, Bonnie, you have done so much mentorship in your life. Is it the one-on-one mentorship that you have? You see the biggest returns? Is it fomenting community of women helping and people of color and marginalized voices together? Like, what do you think is the most effective way forward with people for all of us to encourage and kind of support?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question and touch on the question of being an only in a university or college, which I do think is really something that we have to deal with as a society, as an education, because it is one of the number one reasons why women don't go into or drop out of. So I do think it's an issue that we have to address. And I think that that are offering sort of mixed medium degrees where you have both technology and creativity that are helping the population, but it is something we really need to push on. I think that a lot of it is also education. I would say, to answer your question directly, is we did research at Microsoft for middle school and high schoolers, and I think 91% of them or something identified as creative, and none of them thought technology was creative. And so I do think there is this education for connecting the dots to these young girls and kids of color, of like, it's technology is not like this thing that blocks, it's actually a thing that empowers your dreams. And I think that that in one-on-one mentorship is important, but I do think that we have to hit larger groups of kids in middle school and high school with helping connect the dots. So that would just be, I think it's incredibly important to know what technology is and how it can power art, storytelling, creativity.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I think that's a great example, because that's exactly what GameHeads is. We are a program for high school and college students. We get a lot of young women and queer students who come looking for us because they're looking for a safe space to learn gaming. And so for us, our first mission is to, get this high school students to understand what we're making and what games are. And we also teach them about game culture and how game culture is not necessarily developed for them, and what the future of games means if we are the ones shaping the look of it. And I think once you start having that conversation with people, it gets a lot less scary, because now it's about what kind of vision do I want to create, what sort of games do I want to make, and who I want to make them with, rather than who's going to give me a hard time on my way.
Wow.
There's always going to be someone on that way. I mean, that's just human nature to hit resistance. But what I want our students to understand is that there are people in this community and in this industry who are here to help you. That's why we pair them with mentorships. There are whisper networks for the women if they need to understand how we all survive together. There are leaders that we can talk to help us understand what we're going through. And more importantly, your ideas are no worse than anyone else's. You're actually probably going to help us push this industry a lot further than anyone that I'm currently seeing in it. So I'm really just focused on the next generation of students, because they just have a much better understanding of how the world is going to work than I think that people going in the industry right now do.
Wow, that's amazingly put. And I just want to point out to the audience, because I have 15 other questions and we are out of time. So I would love for each of you to wrap up and tell everyone where they can find your work and your advocacy. But I just want to show the audience about how much more work all these women but choose to put into cultivating other generations to course correct the industry itself, and how much more work they put in than a male colleague is probably putting into mentor. You know what I'm saying? So that it's so much extra labor that goes into all of our lives to really want to change the path. And the more, whatever background yours is, the more you can enable people who and help in your own way, it would be really appreciated. So whatever it is, donating to an organization, supporting people, supporting mentorship programs, going and mentoring yourself, women and people of color shouldn't have to do all the work themselves on top of everything else. Anyway, so that's me. Could each of you, thank you so much. All of you, you're so fascinating. I'd love for each of you to go down where everybody could find your work and follow you and your work on Twitter or wherever it is you'd like to direct them. Lizette, could you go first?
Sure. Hi, you can find more information about me at lizettetitra.com. And I'm currently working at Double Fine on Psychonauts 2. So the best way to find out information on that project is to go to our FIG campaign, which is FIG/PS2. And so that's where you'd find out a little bit more about Psychonauts. Thankfully, we were kickstarted, so there's a lot of development videos. So it's a bit more comprehensive than you would normally get through the development process. And the organization that I work for is GameHeads, gameheadsoakland.org. We are always looking for mentors, especially women. We need a lot more women mentors for our students. And we're also always looking for mentors in general, especially technical and creative ones. So we can pair you with some of our more mature college students who are almost ready for school. And we're also looking for companies to partner with us with pathway programs. Like I said, we have some of our students coming out of USC and multiple universities who are now looking for jobs, and we're trying to get them placed. So
Amazing.
Please reach out to Oakland, gameheadsoakland.org.
Amazing. Shella, where can people find your work and also your organization and support your organization?
My Twitter is at Shella Ramanan, and currently it's Black History Month in the UK, so expect another, what is it, like 19 days of Black British history. I've got a thread going for Black History Month. The at POC in Play is where you can find out about my diversity organization, and you'll find the website there, and yeah, sponsorship opportunities and like volunteering opportunities there. Or if you need some help and support, you need to reach out to a network to help you get into the games industry, then come and say hi to us. And then I've got a crib sheet with all my Twitter.
Good. No, definitely do.
Because otherwise I will just have amnesia and just be like, oh. And then so the last one is at Threefold Games, if you want to know more about Before I Forget. And then I have another game that's in very early development called Windrush Tales, which is about the Windrush generation, going from the Caribbean, two characters going from the Caribbean to England in the 1950s.
Amazing. Oh, great. Anna, could you tell everybody where they can find your work?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at adult_witch, and you can find my games at w.itch.io or at AAAgames.biz.
Yay. And Bonnie, could you wrap us up for where we can people find you?
HaloWaypoint.com has all things Halo, and within there you also see more things about 343 industry and jobs. Come work for us. And then for me, it's Pluton Forever for Twitter.
Amazing. I want to thank all of you. I have been inspired so much by all of your voices, all of your ideas, and you are truly forming the new generation of awesome women who are going to be working in this industry. And I want to thank you so much for your time. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Next week will be a really awesome show, so stay tuned. I think it's Dungeon Masters, right? Yeah. And we're going to have a good time. So thank you. Bye.